Well, good morning, everyone. We are at Exodus 19 this morning, which means we are at the foot of Mount Sinai. So let's see what's going on. So in the narrative of things, right, we've seen the people of Israel delivered from slavery in Egypt. They've been led to the Red Sea. They've gone through the wilderness, which we looked at a little bit last week, and now they've gone to their sort of intermediate destination, which is Mount Sinai. The ultimate destination, of course, is the Promised Land. So I want us to think about what's going on Mount Sinai. How do we characterize it? How do we talk about it? And then I want to take a look at a little bit about what's called the Book of the Covenant, which is given on Mount Sinai. So what's happening on Mount Sinai? Well, normally, right, for a lot of people, they think of this as, in one way or another, this is like the giving of the law on Mount Sinai, right? And so God's giving all these different laws that we read about in Exodus and Numbers and also in Leviticus. And of course, you know, that doesn't sound very exciting, does it? To be given laws that you're supposed to keep, and it kind of has an awful sense of duty and obligation and all that kind of stuff. So let's push that out of our minds for a minute, and let's rethink what's going on at the top of Mount Sinai, because it's much more important than simply laws. A couple things I think will help us understand what's going on here. And the first thing is this. The word that's usually used in the Old Testament for what is often translated as law is the Hebrew word Torah, T-O-R-A-H. And I'm going to go ahead and use that word because Torah has a number of meanings. One of those meanings really isn't what we would call law. Torah means more something along the lines of instruction. So here's the point. On Mount Sinai, Israel is not simply receiving a bunch of laws that they then have to keep, right? As if somehow, right, what was going on Mount Sinai was kind of like an extended session of Congress. All these laws were passed, and then they left, and now having to do all these different things. No. The purpose of Torah is to provide the people of Israel instruction and guidance in how they're supposed to carry out their vocation as God's chosen people. Okay, really, really important. Okay. I'm going to suggest in a minute that one way to think of what's going on Mount Sinai, once again, is not just a bunch of laws, but we want to think about what's going on Mount Sinai as more along the lines of a marriage between God and his people. One way to kind of think about that is this. Here's what God tells Moses to tell the people of Israel in Exodus 19, starting at verse 3. The Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Israel, and tell the people of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. I freed you from Egypt, and I've brought you here for a face-to-face meeting with me. Okay? Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And then Moses tells the people of Israel all this, and they respond in Exodus 19:8. All the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. You get the pattern here, right? In effect, what we have here is a marriage vow. And if you look in the Book of Common Prayer, you'll note that it's called holy matrimony, and marriage is referred to as the bond and covenant of marriage. The marriage liturgy is actually modeled on what takes place at Mount Sinai. What takes place on Mount Sinai is a bond, a covenant, a joining together of God and the people of Israel. When we get to Exodus 24, we'll see how this works itself out in some fairly dramatic way. So let's think about what's going on here as God is giving these people their instructions on how they are to be his people in the world, how they're to carry out their vocation. And it's really important to notice that we just want to once again try to get rid of any notion, right, that all talk about law is just simply like dull and boring, and if you follow it long enough, you'll end up in legalism and this sort of thing. So let me read to you Psalm 19, verses 7 through 8, just to give you a sense here. Psalm 19 is a kind of a reflection on Torah, so here it is. The Torah of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. Notice that doesn't sound very boring, does it? Unless you find being enlightened and rejoicing and having your heart purified dull, well, then I guess it would sound dull, but it doesn't sound dull to me. So we just want to kind of keep that in our minds as we think about Torah here and what it all means. Second thing that we want to keep in our minds, right, about another aspect of something that's going on here on Mount Sinai, and that is, remember, all of this is in response to something. And it's what we saw back in Genesis 3, right? The human rebellion against God. So sin introduces chaos and disorder into the world. One of the purposes of Torah is to begin to reintroduce order. Okay, and this gets us to a really important point. Human beings, generally speaking, right, don't flourish in chaos, right? That's one of the things that's made COVID so bad, right? As in many ways, as mild comparatively as its effects were, right? All aspects of our lives were kind of like upended. You couldn't travel anywhere. You had to figure out what COVID protocol follow, in which place, at what time, and when, and none of it was really fun, and it is kind of going on and on. So human beings don't flourish under chaos, and Torah here reveals another one of God's purposes. God's reintroducing order so that human beings can flourish. God wants his creatures to flourish, right? And chaos always works against that. So what God does is God works to reintroduce order so that flourishing can take place. So that's another thing that's going on here. Okay, let's take a quick look at Israel's vocation. I read part of it to you just a minute ago. God tells the people of Israel, look, I've freed you from Pharaoh. I've brought you here to myself. We're going to kind of have a face-to-face meeting. And then he says this, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you, former slaves, shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples of the earth. You former slaves, you people who basically lived, died working for Pharaoh, you people who really didn't matter to him one bit, you are going to become the treasured possession of the creator of the universe in this covenant. Among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. So here's what God tells the people of Israel. He said, look, here's your vocation. You are going to be a kingdom, a nation of priests. The idea being here, right, that the people of Israel are going to be a point of connection between God and the world. That's going to be their mission. That's what it means to be a priest. We get this really clearly in the Latin word. The Latin word for priest is pontifex, and it literally comes from the Latin word for bridge, pontus. A priest here literally is like a bridge between two things. And so what God's telling the people of Israel, look, I'm calling you together, I'm making this covenant with you, I am training you to be my people, and your mission in the world is you are going to be a bridge between a broken and disjointed and sin-sick humankind and me. That's your mission. That's why I'm setting you apart. That's why you are going to be a holy nation, a nation consecrated to my service. And by the way, the whole of the earth is mine, so it's not like I really need you to do this. Okay? Not needing you, I'm calling you to serve me anyway. And I think this is really important. This will, of course, obviously condition the church's understanding of ministry, right? So we want to remember two things, right? On one hand, God has involved us in a really, really important way in his plans and purposes for the world. But in doing that, he actually doesn't really need us. But he's given us that vocation anyway. Okay, so what that means, right, is, and I think both for the people of Israel and also for us, is it's a vocation that's to be received with a sense of joy and thanksgiving. Not to be received merely with a sense of sort of okay, well, if that's what God wants, I guess that's what he's going to get. So we have to be his chosen people. What does he want now? Okay, it's not that. Okay, it's oh, wait a minute. The creator of the universe actually doesn't need us to do anything, because he doesn't need anything at all. And yet, not really needing us, he's allowed us to play a role in his purposes for the world. Okay? One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was somebody telling me, and this is kind of directed to, a lot of times people who are in parish ministry go through really difficult times where they kind of wonder whether what they do really matters or not, and they get kind of depressed and sometimes get angry and this sort of thing. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was, say every day to yourself, when you come to the church, this is what I get to do today. This is what I get to do. This is what God's allowing me to do today. And I think that changes perspective immensely. So that's Israel's mission. We're going to see in 10 chapters in Exodus 29 that having created the people of Israel as a kingdom of priests, we're going to get Aaron and his sons consecrated to the priesthood of the Old Covenant. So more about that later. One final thing here about what happens at the base of Mount Sinai, and that's this. These are part of the instructions that God gives to Moses as the people are assembling in Exodus 19:10. The Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments and be ready for the third day, for on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. You shall set limits for the people all around, saying, take care not to go up to the mountain or toward the edge of it, for whoever touches the mountain shall be put to death. No hand shall touch him, but he shall be stoned or shot. Whether beast or man, he shall not live." So the idea right here is as the people of Israel get ready to meet God, who's coming on Mount Sinai, they're told, okay, consecrate yourselves. Set yourselves apart. Wash your clothes. That's a sign of purification, right? They didn't have wash machines back then, so washing clothes was not necessarily like a regular part of daily life. But the idea here is the people of Israel are they're going to kind of stand back from the base of the mountain. They're going to wash their clothes. They're going to stand back in awe because, and this will be an important principle that we'll see, right? They are going to be in the presence of God. And that presence is never, ever to be approached casually and without thought. Okay, this is not just like an interesting religious experience or something like that. These people are about to meet the creator of the universe. And therefore, you don't just kind of waltz in and say, hey, God, we're here. What do you have to say? Something like that, okay? So they're learning something really important about God. They're learning about God's holiness. And we'll see that emphasis is maintained all the way throughout the Old Testament in some rather dramatic ways. This is reinforced in the description that we get on what God's appearance on Mount Sinai looks like. I'll read once again part of it to you. It's Exodus 19:16 and following. On the morning of the third day, there were thunders and lightning and a thick cloud on the mountain and a very loud trumpet blast, so that all the people in the camp trembled. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they took their stand at the foot of the mountain. Now Mount Sinai was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke of it went up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. Get the sense of all that, right? The mountain is shaking. There's fire and smoke and this trumpet blast. It gets louder and louder and louder and louder. All of this, right, is to emphasize that God really is present at the top of the mountain. This is not just a metaphorical experience or an imagined experience. This is a real encounter with the living God, one of the Old Testament's favorite titles for God. Now let's take a quick look, and I mean a very quick look, at the 10 words. By the way, our phrase 10 commandments actually never appears in the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. They're called the 10 words, which is why if you look in the Book of Common Prayer to find the 10 commandments, you'll find it denoted as the Decalogue, literally the 10 words, deca 10, logos words, the 10 words. So these are the 10 words that are spoken to Israel as part of the Book of the Covenant, which we'll take a look at. So a really quick treatment. This is the 10 words in about 5 minutes. Okay, so it's going to be either really good or really bad. I'll leave you to decide which one it is. So I think what we can do is we can kind of look at the words here as aimed at a number of things. We want to think about their purposes. The first is this. There's a preamble to the 10 words, and it's this. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So, really important preamble. What are the 10 words for, and what's the Book of the Covenant that's going to follow them? What's their purpose? Well, their purpose is this. Their purpose is to guide the people of Israel in responding to their being liberated from slavery in Egypt. Okay, notice how God actually identifies himself. I am the Lord your God, who graciously brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, and now, here's how you're going to respond. Really important point here. Notice, Israel doesn't keep the law to get God's favor because they already have it. They've already been brought out of Egypt, right? They've already been delivered. That's already done. Now, we get instructions about how the people are going to respond to what God has done. So I think that's a really important thing. Now, the 10 words basically are aimed at sort of like two different things, and they're not really different, they're just distinct. On one hand, the 10 words aim at our relationship with God, and on the other hand, the 10 words aim at our relationship with other people. And I think that's intentional in an important sense, right? The idea here is that righteousness, justice, and we just want to remember here that both in Hebrew and also in Greek, our word righteousness and our word justice are the same word. They're different in English, but they're the same in both Hebrew and Greek. The idea here is that justice or righteousness essentially involves two things. Justice and righteousness involve being properly related to God and properly related to other people. Right? That's why when Jesus is asked the greatest commandment in the 22nd chapter of Matthew, remember what he says? He says, oh, well, that's easy. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. Oh, and the second one is like it. And that's when the lawyers, wait a minute, I only asked for one. And the second one is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus is making the point, right, that you can't disconnect those things. You can't disconnect how you relate to God and how you relate to other people. That's like one of the primary principles of the whole of Torah. You can't separate those two things. So let's take a look at the first part. So how are we to relate to God? Well, the first couple commandments deal with that. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy. Those are all commandments or guidance for how to properly relate to God. We'll actually see there's a lot more because we'll get a whole list of feasts and a whole list of things in Leviticus and Numbers about how Israel is supposed to worship God. So this is sort of like an initial encounter. But some really fundamental things here. So first of all is this. Israel is married to God, and therefore the covenant here is a covenant of exclusive loyalty, right? They're living in a world where basically, people trade and collect gods and goddesses like baseball cards, right? All kinds of gods, all kinds of goddesses for all kinds of different reasons. And, you've got your 10 here, and you decide that God number 5 is going to maybe help you in some way. So you get a statue of that God and you bring it home and you set it on the fireplace mantle, and now you've got 11 or 12 or 13, and they're all kind of there. And so the first part of the covenant right here is exclusive loyalty to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who has revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush as the Lord, the one true God. So this is a covenant of exclusive loyalty. And we'll see the people of Israel continually struggling with this. And of course, anybody who knows anything about church history will see a continuous struggle in the church with this as well. The struggle is still going on today. You shall not make a carved image of God. Why? Because God's already created an image of himself. And guess what that image is? Us. God made human beings, male and female, in his own image. God already has an image. It's the one he has created, and that's us. And therefore, right, we're not to kind of go about the business of manufacturing. And I think the idea here, right, is, and you can see where this is going, right? Our tendency, right, is to want to kind of think about God in terms that we find pleasing or that we would sort of like, right? So God, comes to acquire all the sorts of qualities that we value. And this commandment is kind of putting a roadblock on that road. We have to allow God to be who he is and not kind of constantly want to create a God that is like more to our liking, okay? The Sabbath is really important as well, right? So as far as we know, in the whole of the ancient world, the people of Israel were the only people that had a day set aside for rest. It was one of the things that set the people of Israel apart. So remember, we're living in a world where people work sun up to sundown 7 days a week. There's no weekend. Okay? The weekend is kind of like a relatively modern invention. So the Sabbath as an institution is really important. And one of the things that it says, right, is you're living in a primarily agricultural society, right, where in many ways your next meal is going to depend on whether the crops turn out well this year. And now you're being told that there's 1 day a week in which you're not going to do any work at all. You're going to trust God. You're going to trust that God's the creator and he's in sufficient control of things that you can rely on not working. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in this commandment. I think that one of the things that's going on here in the commandment about the Sabbath, right, is it gets at one of the modern world's kind of chief idols. It's an idol that many Americans worship, and that's the idol of productivity and success. Powerful idol. And what God's telling the people of Israel here is, look, there's more to human life and there's more to human meaning than work. You're not just simply a sum of what you produce. Why? Because you were made in my image. Why are you people valuable? Well, you're valuable because I think you're valuable. And I'm the creator. Okay? I think you're worth something, and I'm the creator, so it must be true, right? Because I made you. So this is an act of faith, and I'll just point out, it's really interesting, and I think God obviously has an insight into human nature, because this is what God says in Exodus 20:10. On it you shall do no work, you, your son, your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your livestock, or the sojourner who's within your gates. But as notice, God's very specific here, okay? You can't work, your children can't work, your hired help can't work, your animals can't work, because I know how you people think. Okay? I know if I just said, don't you work, somebody's children are going to be out in the field doing something. Okay? I know how you people think. So I'm just going to make it clear. Notice this. The Sabbath applies to sojourners, non-Israelites living in Israelite territory. There are no exceptions to the Sabbath. Just because someone is from some other place, you can't force them to work on the Sabbath because the Sabbath applies to them too. It's kind of a revolutionary idea. And then we have a set of commandments that govern our relationship to other people. And I think that one of the things that might kind of help looking at this part of Torah would be to think about it this way. These commandments are actually aimed at creating a kind of stable and humane social order in many ways. So here's how, we'll just take a very quick look at them. So honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land, and that the Lord your God is giving you. And this commandment primarily has to do not with young children obeying their parents, although you don't need to tell your kids that. And it'd probably be good if you didn't. But rather, the commandment actually has to do with adult children taking care of their parents when their parents are old and unable to take care of themselves. That is, notice what's being said here. One of the things that makes for a stable and humane order is when there's a bond between the generations that's recognized. Okay? Those of us who are here now, right? We have an obligation to those who have come before us, the generation that preceded us. And therefore, we need to make sure that when they're old or sick and can't take care of themselves, that somehow they're taken care of. Because it's not just about us. There's a fundamental bond that exists between the generations, and if society is going to flourish and succeed, that bond is going to have to be acknowledged and also honored. You shall not murder. Once again, we have, another fundamental principle of a humane social order, right, is respect for innocent life. Okay? Respect for innocent life. No one's free to kill someone because you simply think they're in the way. Okay? And the reason for that, right, is, as will be made clear later, the thing that makes murder so awful is you are literally usurping the place of God. When you kill someone, you are saying, you know what? I'm really the creator, and I get to decide who lives and who doesn't. And John over there isn't going to live, bang. You just literally usurped the place of God. So once again, a sort of caution here and a protection placed on innocent life. You shall not commit adultery. And now here we have another aspect, a fundamental aspect of the social order, right? To some degree or another, the health of a society will depend on the health of the marriages within it. Right? There's very few things that sociologists and psychologists agree upon in terms of raising children, but one thing that they all agree upon is the best prescription for the success of the lives of children is living in a stable two-parent household. It's no coincidence that God designed it that way, right? Because once again, right, God wants human life to flourish. And so another aspect of flourishing now is a recognition of the role that marriage plays in social health and social stability. You shall not steal. Here's another really important idea. The idea here is that the thing that's important about property is not that property is important in and of itself. It's something of an abstraction, right? But the thing that's important about property is that when you take somebody's property or when you destroy it, you're actually attacking that person, okay? If I'm a farmer and someone comes along and steals one of my horses or steals my plow, that's harming me, right? When you steal, you're literally damaging and infringing upon the dignity and worth of an individual. So theft here is now kind of like taken off the table, right? We're supposed to honor the possessions of other people, because in many ways, those possessions are an extension of that person's personhood, okay? And that's why it's important. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Once again, right? When we start telling lies about other people, we basically tell ourselves, okay, it's all right to ignore their dignity. I can say anything I want about so-and-so, even if it's not true, right? I can go on Facebook and post all kinds of stuff about somebody that's really not true or only partially true because, you know what, I basically don't care. We're being warned against that, right? That when we say something false about someone and start to spread it around, once again, it's another form of stealing. We are damaging, we are harming someone. And once again, that's being put off limits. So think about a society, right, where this isn't acknowledged, where people believe themselves to be free basically to say anything about anyone that they really want, and then to kind of spread it around. And think about what that might look like when this actually starts to get into courts of law and people start giving false testimony. And when this sort of creeps into juries and then kind of creeps into the judiciary, right? Where you have like a recognition of truth starts to like slip away and the whole process now becomes arbitrary. It becomes a question, okay, who can hire the best lawyer? You know, whether you get justice depends on, you know, who can hire the best lawyer, and of course some places that's where they are right now. So that's kind of put off the table. And then finally, a prohibition against coveting. Your neighbor's house, your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's swimming pool, your neighbor's new sports car, your neighbor's degree from Yale. You get the picture. That is, the idea here is, and this is where we'll stop, the idea with coveting is, right, coveting is sort of like a double spiritual disaster. When I covet, I do two things. I look at something that somebody else has, and I start to want it, right? I begin to think, you know, well, so-and-so doesn't really deserve to have that swimming pool or that degree from Yale or whatever, right? I deserve it, and I want it. And the other thing that happens to me, right, guess what? The more I begin to look around at what people have that I don't have, guess what happens? My sense of gratitude goes. And what happens, right, instead of being grateful for what I do have, I become, it's like a mass of envy and anger about all the things that I don't have. You know, so-and-so down the street just put a new swimming pool. Why don't I have a swimming pool? And, you know, so-and-so just sent their son off to Harvard. Why am I not sending my son to Harvard? And, you know, so-and-so just got a big promotion. Why didn't I get a promotion? It goes on and on and on, and it becomes spiritually disastrous. So here we have these kind of fundamental things that are put in place, and their purpose actually is to begin to create and foster a genuinely humane order where people can begin to flourish. We'll see this gets filled in with more detail in the book of the Covenant, which actually starts in Exodus 21:1. So we'll pick that up next week, and we'll see this book of the Covenant, which now kind of gives additional order for the life of the people of Israel. Oops, better get going.